The full moon shined brightly in the sky as Christina was dressed in a white gown with a white cape with sawtooth edges on it. She was wearing a white neck ruffle and a white wrist ruffles. Christina was smirking. She had long fangs, and she hissed as she saw a mouse running around on the ground. Christina quickly pounced at the mouse and grabbed it with her fangs, causing it to bleed. She then drained the blood from the mouse until she suddenly heard a ringing sound coming from deeper in the forest. Christina dropped the mouse, and she slowly stood up, looking into the deeper part of the forest. Christina's head popped up as she saw a dark and spooky castle. The ringing suddenly got louder as Christina slowly began to approach the castle. She suddenly noticed blood-red glowing eyes, and she was just about to see who it was behind the fog, but before she could, she woke up to hear people yelling outside. The moon began to rise as fog began to appear all around the city. Then all of a sudden a group of vampires immediately rose from the shadows and flew down from the city. Some of them were in bat form, while others just appeared from the shadows. Just then one of the vampires jumped in front of the people with a smirk on his face. He had blonde hair and he was dressed in black clothing and a black cape. "What's that you hear?" He leans in towards the humans, holding his hand over his ear. The sound of fear. He holds out his hands to the humans, causing them to scream with fear and run away as if they were being chased by bears. Ah! Because they're here. The vampires roaming the night. He leaps in the air. "What's that you say?" He lifts his hand over his ear again, looking at the other humans. The humans stood there in fear with their eyes wide, and they began to shake. Just then, two other vampires came right behind them and quickly grabbed them and hissed at them, causing the humans to panic and run for their lives. "Eee! Can't be," he smirks, wickedly lifting a brow. "No way!" Just then, two other vampires came rushing in. One was wearing a werewolf mask while the other was wearing a Frankenstein mask. They quickly rushed up towards the other humans, hissing and grabbing them, causing them to scream to death. The blonde-haired vampire rolled his eyes, nodding his head back and forth. "They're fake." He grabbed both of their masks and took them off. "Okay." He looks towards the scared humans. "Believe whatever you might." He suddenly turns into a bat, flying into the air, and lands on the street light, turning back to his normal form. But when the moon is full on a starlit night, he waves one of his hands, causing pretty sparkles to appear from his hand. "You best all lock your doors up tight." He happily leaped down from the street light, dancing with the other vampires. He took off his black hat, continuing to dance with other vampires. Because, my friend, just then all the vampires joined the dance with the others. The vampires start to dance. Two of the vampires noticed four of the humans were hiding under the table, shaking with fear, like they were gonna get eaten alive. "They're all around you. Everyone's coming to play." Three of them rushed over. "Oh yes, they found you," three of the vampires said, crouching on top of the table, leaning towards them with a wicked smirk. "And now they're gonna take you away." They quickly picked up the table and threw it across the street. The humans ran away with terror. "Watch out, take care," the blonde-haired vampire flicked his cape. "Be smart, beware, because out there..." He was enjoying this dance and fearing moment until he felt like the whole world stopped, and he began to feel himself tremble when he noticed a woman walking right by him, acting like he and his vampire friends weren't even there. The woman had a grin on her face. She wore purple lipstick on her lips. She was carrying a black book. She wore a spike choker and a black dress. He quickly ran in front of her and lifts up her chin to see her pretty face. He then smirks right in her face with his eyes sparkling like the night stars. Something's waiting for you. When midnight comes, the blonde-haired vampire quickly jumps back towards his friends, continuing to dance with his vampire friends. He took out a cane and he began to dance using his cane. It's time to hide, say goodnight, and run inside. The humans ran to each other's houses and immediately slammed and locked the doors. Two of the little girls ran under their beds, shaking with fear. The woman, dressed in black clothing, rolled her eyes with annoyance and began to walk away. The blonde-haired vampire smirked, lifting a growl. Because that, my friend, is when they all come out again. Then suddenly more vampires came appearing from the shadows, dancing with delight. Oh yes, right now is when the blonde-haired vampire pointed with his cane. The vampires dance. Just then a family of four came walking down the street. The vampires slowly snuck up on them. Just then fog began to fill the air surrounding the small family of humans. They suddenly noticed shadows approaching them. They slowly looked closer to see who it was. Just then 3 vampires stuck their heads out, smirking at them. The vampires dance. Boo! The small family screamed with terror, quickly grabbing their children and running down the street. Ah! Growl, growl. The blonde-haired vampire couldn't resist the dark-looking woman. He licked his fangs, looking at her as she headed indoors. Just then he broke out of La La Land when he heard one of his friends speak. Forget it, Klaus. Klaus turns to his friends. Are you saying I don't have a shot? Klaus lifted a brow. She's related to a vampire hunter family, and plus, she's not even easy to scare. Didn't you see the way how she looked at us when we were singing and dancing just to terrorize the city? Perhaps we just need to get to know each other a little better. Klaus puts his hands together, smirking, lifting a brow as he continued to watch her. Lydia stepped inside Van Helsing's castle. She was about to head upstairs, but before she did, she heard something hit the wall of the castle from downstairs. Huh? Lydia turned around. Who's there? She asked, but there was no answer. She turned around and headed upstairs again. How strange it is that she heard a noise, but she didn't know where it came from. The next day arrived as Kryptina and Anastasia quickly began to sweep the floor while Snowy batted a hairball across the floor. Quickly, he's coming! Anastasia quickly tossed her broom to her. Okay, Kryptina quickly tossed her broom onto the side. Her eyes looked back and forth. She noticed Snowy, her gray and white lynx, batting a hairball across the floor. Kryptina quickly picked up the hairball and threw it outside. Snowy growled at her with annoyance. They saw Chester come in. He was a strong vampire hunter, and he was just a hunter for Abraham Van Helsing for only a few months now. Although many people, including her and her brother Chester, were great vampire hunters, nobody was ever able to be as good as Abraham Van Helsing. Hey, Chester, Kryptina said, stepping towards him. It's been a while since they last spent some time together, and she's hardly been outside of the city since they first moved after their mothers passed. May I please go and hunt with you? Chester kneeled down to her and tied an apron on her waist. Kryptina, you know the Lord's Protector and most best vampire slayers have strict rules. No children beyond the walls. You know that. Chester catches her disappointed glance. Look, the forest is running with real vampires. It's my job to slay them, not yours. He rests his hand over his chest, smiling at her. But I'm not afraid of vampires. Kryptina shook her head. Have you ever seen a real vampire before? Chester rests his hand on his hips. No, but I'm still not afraid of them, Kryptina argued, and shook her head again. And that's why I must be afraid for you. Chester rested his hand on her shoulder, and he turned around. He picked up a bag filled with his hunting gear. "All right, I gotta go and hunt now. You and your friend Anastasia stay indoors," Chester said, closing the door. Kryptina threw her apron off with frustration. "Come on, Anastasia." Anastasia lifted a brow. They both ran outside of their hut. Kryptina was carrying her crossbow with her wooden stake. "Where are we going?" Anastasia asked. "I want to explore the forest." Anastasia stopped once they reached the gate to where Kryptina's brother went. She knew he must have just left to go out hunting again. He barely allows her to leave ever since they moved to Transylvania. They were a family from London. They were about to head for the wall, but before they could, they heard a voice from behind them. "Kryptina?" Kryptina and Anastasia both turned around. Kryptina felt nervous when she and her friend noticed her brother standing there, holding a large brown bag, lifting a brow. "What are you doing here?" Chester leaned in. "Anastasia was going to stay here a while. I'll only track you as far as the gate." She pointed at the wall, hoping her brother will believe her. "And then what? Follow me and slay a school of vampires all by yourself?" He rests his hand on her with a smile. "Yeah, we can hunt vampires, werewolves, witches even." Kryptina smiled with excitement. "Ha ha ha ha. You and your silly fantasies." Chester grabbed her by her hands, and they suddenly began to dance to the music of the people playing flutes. That happy, playful moment ended when they heard a voice. "Good hunter, come here!" Chester turns to his sister. "Kryptina, stay here," Chester said, resting his hand on her shoulder. Then he took off to see what was wrong. Kryptina was just about to leave Anastasia behind to follow her brother until she heard voices crying out vampires coming through the curtains. "Vampire! Vampire! Vampire! Kill the vampire!" Kryptina slowly entered through the curtains, holding up her crossbow, placing a wooden stake in it. She aimed her bow only to see younger boys laughing and holding swords there. Their clothing was torn, their hair was ragged, and they looked as if they'd been in a real fight before. Kryptina frowned, lowering her crossbow. She turned away, and she was just about to exit the alley, but before she did, one of the boys gave her a smirk. "Hey, lady," one of the boys said, waving up his sword. "Where do you think you're going, and what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at home wearing ribbons in your hair?" He giggled, hopping off the dumpster. Kryptina turned to the boys, narrowing her eyes. What do they want with her? They weren't even hunting a real vampire. "I'm a hunter." She tries to keep her wooden stake on her crossbow. "Do you hear that?" One of the boys smirked and turned to his friends as they giggled. "Well, my brother's the best vampire hunter, and we're hunting for the Lord Protector." Kryptina put her crossbow on her back and crossed her arms. "No, you're not," one of the boys cried, waving his sword at her. "I, Danny Polidori, the son of Patrick Polidori, is the best, and the Lord Protector put my father in chains for nothing." Danny waves his sword with anger. "You think you ladies are so great, but you're not. Now go home." Danny points outside of the alley. "But first, let me borrow your crossbow." Danny was just about to snatch Kryptina's crossbow, but before he could get the chance to, he and his friends' eyes widened with fear when they saw Kryptina's brother standing right behind her. He crossed his arms and narrowed his eyes. "It's a soldier! Run!" Danny and his friends rushed off as if they were being chased by vampires. Kryptina turned to see her brother Chester crossing his arms, lifting a brow at her. She puts her crossbow on her back, and her cheeks began to turn pink.